In this video, you will have the opportunity to take an IELTS reading practice test. You will see a passage and questions. After you finish the test, I will show you how to find the correct answers quickly. Now, grab some paper and a pen so you can write down your answers and compare them with the correct answers I will show you afterwards. If you're going to take your IELTS soon, check out my IELTS materials. There, I teach you everything you need to score high. I show you step by step how to give high scoring answers. And of course, we do many practice tests together, so you will feel confident for your test. You can find the link in the description below. And now let's get started. By the way, if you want more IELTS reading practice tests, hit the like button and write yes in the comments. If you want something else, tell me your video wish in the comments so I know what you would like to see on this channel. Now, let's continue solving this test. Let's start with question 27. The instructions say, does the following statement agree with the views of the writer in reading passage 3? Write yes if the statement agrees with the views of the writer. No if the statement contradicts the views of the writer. Not given if it is impossible to say what the writer thinks about this. The statement says, artists in the Art Nouveau style viewed themselves as either applied or fine artists. Now, let's take a look at the key part of the passage. It says, the goal of the movement was to blur the boundaries between the so-called applied arts, such as furniture and architecture design, and the so-called fine arts, such as sculpture and painting. So the correct answer is no. Why? Because the statement in the question says Art Nouveau artists saw themselves as either one or the other, applied or fine artists. But the passage clearly says the opposite. Their goal was to blur the boundaries between the two. They didn't want to be limited to just one category. So instead of separating themselves into groups, these artists were actually combining both styles to create something more unified. That's why the correct answer is no. Let's take a look at question 28. The Art Nouveau movement first emerged in Belgium. To answer this, we need to look closely at the passage. It says, the term Art Nouveau was first used in a Belgian journal in the 1880s to describe the work of 20 painters and sculptors seeking to reform the art scene. Then it adds, architect Victor Horta designed a classic Art Nouveau hotel, the Hotel Tossel, in 1893 in Brussels, Belgium, spurring an interest that quickly spread to France. So, is the answer yes, no, or not given? The correct answer is yes. Here's why. The passage gives us two key clues. First, the term Art Nouveau was first used in a Belgian journal. Second, a major example of the style. Victor Horta's Hotel Tossel was built in Brussels in 1893. And finally, we're told that the interest in Art Nouveau then spread to France. That clearly suggests Belgium was where it all began. Some people might focus only on the French influence, especially with the Paris metro entrances and the gallery in 1895. But all of that came after the Belgian examples. So based on the order in the passage, Belgium was the starting point. That's why the answer is yes. The passage confirms that the movement first emerged in Belgium. Now, let's move on to question 29. Eugene Viollet-le-Duc's paintings were not as good as those of later Art Nouveau artists. Let's find what the passage actually says. In the third paragraph, we're told, in 1851, the French theorist and artist Eugene Viollet-le-Duc promoted rules of art that stated that function must define the form of the piece. He also claimed that nature's logic should fill the artwork and that the materials and techniques used should be modern. So we get a good idea of his ideas, his philosophy about art. But what about his actual paintings? Here's the key. The passage does not say anything about the quality of his work. It doesn't praise or criticize his paintings, and it definitely doesn't compare them to the work of later Art Nouveau artists. That's why the correct answer here is not given. Remember, even though he's mentioned as an artist, we can't assume anything about how good or bad his art was. Here you must base your answer on what's actually written in the passage, not what seems likely or what you might guess. So the answer is not given because the writer simply doesn't tell us how his paintings compared to others. Let's move on to question 30. Siegfried Bing was the main person who introduced Japanese art to Europe. This sounds like a big claim, saying that one person was mainly responsible for introducing Japanese art to an entire continent. So let's look at what the passage actually says. In the same paragraph, we read, in 1862, Japan sent exhibits to the International Exhibition in London, and Japanese woodblock prints became fashionable, influencing the compositions of many artists. Then it says, Gallery owner Siegfried Bing even published a monthly journal dedicated to Japanese art between 1888 and 1891. So what can we tell from that? Well, first of all, Japanese art was already popular in Europe by 1862, long before Siegfried Bing's journal started. The passage says Japanese prints became fashionable after the London exhibition, and many artists were already being influenced by it. Siegfried Bing definitely played a role. He supported Japanese art and helped promote it. But the question says he was the main person who introduced it, and the passage doesn't support that. In fact, it clearly shows that Japanese art was known and appreciated in Europe before Bing got involved. That's why the correct answer is no. Now let's dive into question 31. The art of Alphonse Mucha plays a much wider role than just advertisement. To figure this out, let's take a look at what the passage says about Mucha and his work. The text tells us, one of the most famous artists of the style was graphic designer Alphonse Mucha. His work exemplifies the spirit of Art Nouveau because he broke the boundaries between advertisement and art. Then it goes on. He created a series of posters advertising the plays of actress Sarah Bernhardt. However, they were so beautiful that they were sought out by collectors. So what does this mean? Basically, Mucha wasn't just making posters to sell theater tickets. His art was so visually stunning and unique that people wanted to keep it, to collect it, and to use it in ways that went far beyond the original purpose. And even now, his designs are still popular. They're found on t-shirts, stationery, mugs, and more. That clearly shows that his art went beyond simple advertising. It became part of popular culture, and it blurred the line between commercial design and fine art. So the correct answer is yes. The statement agrees with the views of the writer. Mucha's work wasn't just advertising. It had artistic value and cultural impact far beyond that. Let's take a look at question 32. Regional styles of Art Nouveau followed the idea that function defines form. This question brings us back to a key idea mentioned earlier in the passage, specifically the ideas of the French theorist Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. The passage says, each region had its own variations, but the basic ideas proposed by Viollet-le-Duc, that function must define the form of the piece, were embodied by them all. In other words, the shape and design of an object should be based on how it's going to be used, not just on decoration. So if the regional styles all embodied his basic ideas, then yes, function-defining form must have been part of their designs too. And now let's take a look at question 33. The Art Nouveau style will never be as popular as it was around 1900. Let's see what the passage says. In the final paragraph, we're told, by the 1920s, Art Nouveau's graceful lines were discarded for the angular shapes of Art Deco and modernism. But then it goes on to say, interest in the style rebounded in the late 1960s, and that in the early 2000s, Art Nouveau aesthetics are resurfacing in the art world. Finally, the writer adds, its graceful natural lines may once again become popular as a way to counteract the rigidity of the technological era. So the passage tells us that Art Nouveau might become popular again, but does it say how popular? Specifically, does it compare it to its peak around the year 1900? No, it doesn't. The writer never says whether the style will become less, equally or more popular than it was back then. And the question makes a very strong claim, will never be as popular as it was. That's a clear comparison, but the passage doesn't make that comparison. That's why the correct answer is not given. We'll move on to question 34. The instructions say, complete the flowchart below. Choose no more than 3 words from the passage for each answer. Let's read the text. Mid-1800s. Eugène Viollet-le-Duc created rules of art that coincided with an interest in art in Europe. We need to fill in the blank using no more than 3 words from the passage. So where do we look? Let's take a look at the part of the passage that talks about Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. We read, Viollet-le-Duc's ideas came at about the same time as an interest in Far Eastern art arose in Europe. That's our answer right there, Far Eastern. The question tells us that his rules of art coincided with a growing interest in a certain kind of art in Europe. And the passage tells us exactly what kind, Far Eastern art. So the correct answer for question 34 is Far Eastern. Here's a quick tip for this type of question. Always make sure the words you choose come directly from the passage. Don't try to change or paraphrase them, and double-check the word limit. If it says no more than 3 words, stick to that. Let's keep going with our flowchart and look at questions 35 and 36. The flowchart says 1890s. Architect Victor Horta's Art Nouveau, and then comes a gap, created interest in the style that spread to France, wherein, here's another gap, named Siegfried Bing opened a gallery in Paris. Let's break this down. First, we need to find what Victor Horta created. In the passage, it says, architect Victor Horta designed a classic Art Nouveau hotel, the Hotel Tassel, in 1893 in Brussels, Belgium, spurring an interest that quickly spread to France. So the correct answer for question 35 is hotel. You could also write Hotel Tassel. Now for question 36, let's look at what it says about Siegfried Bing. The passage continues. In 1895, influential art dealer Siegfried Bing opened a gallery in Paris called the Maison de l'Art Nouveau. So the phrase that fits best in the blank is art dealer. You could also write influential if you want to be more specific. Influential art dealer is still within the word limit. Next up is question 37 from our flowchart. Here's what it says. 1900s. Over 50 million visitors attended the show called The, and then comes the gap, in Paris, which included art by people such as renowned glass artist Louis Tiffany and jeweler René Lalique. Let's go straight to the passage. It says, Art Nouveau reached its peak at the 1900 Exposition Universelle in Paris. Between April and November, over 50 million visitors from around the world visited the lavish show. This is exactly what the question is referring to. The name of the show, Exposition Universelle. It fits perfectly in the sentence and matches the detail about 50 million visitors in Paris. So the correct answer for question 37 is Exposition Universelle. And just a quick reminder, when the question asks you to name something, a show, an event, or a person, double-check that you're copying the exact words from the passage. IELTS often tests your attention to detail here. Let's move on to question 38 in our flowchart. Here's the text, 1910s to 1920s. The Art Nouveau style ended with the start of World War I, and the movement was replaced with the here's the gap of Art Deco and Modernism. So what exactly replaced Art Nouveau? Let's check the final paragraph. It says, by the 1920s, Art Nouveau's graceful lines were discarded for the angular shapes of Art Deco and Modernism. The key phrase here is discarded for the angular shapes. That tells us the new style that took over had sharp geometric designs, quite different from Art Nouveau's flowing lines. So the correct answer for question 38 is angular shapes. This phrase fits perfectly into the sentence and accurately reflects what replaced Art Nouveau. Now, let's check out question 39. Here's the text, 1970 to present. The Museum of Modern Art held a successful of the works of Hector Guimard, and now Art Nouveau ideas are being used in art again. Let's check the final paragraph to find our answer. The passage says, in 1970, the Museum of Modern Art held a successful retrospective exhibit of the works of Hector Guimard. That matches the wording in the question almost exactly. The phrase we need is retrospective exhibit. It tells us that the museum showcased Guimard's work in a special exhibition, looking back at his contributions. This kind of event is called a retrospective, and according to the passage, it was a successful one. So, retrospective exhibit is the correct answer for question 39. We'll move on to question 40. It's a multiple choice question asking you to choose the most appropriate title for the entire passage. Let's think about what the passage said. The passage begins by explaining what Art Nouveau is and what it aimed to do. It then takes us through the origins, growth, key figures, global spread, peak in 1900, decline, and even a revival in recent decades. So overall, we're getting a full overview of the movement from start to finish. That's why the best answer is B, an introduction to Art Nouveau. Let's look at why the other options don't work. A, the goals of Art Nouveau. The goals are mentioned briefly, but they're not the main focus of the whole passage. C, famous Art Nouveau artists. Sure, a few artists are named, like Alphonse Mucha and Victor Horta, but they're not the central focus. The passage doesn't go into detail about their lives or full bodies of work. D, current trends in Art Nouveau. This is only touched on in the last paragraph. It's not enough to make it the main topic of the passage. Consequently, the correct answer is B. It covers the full scope of what the passage is about, a broad, informative introduction to the Art Nouveau movement. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you're notified when the next video comes out. Also, share this video with your friends so they can improve their IELTS score too. See you in the next video!